Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order this meeting of the Salem-Keizer School District Budget Committee. Roll call, please, Christy.
Betty Patacoli.
Here.
Nancy McMorris Audix.
Here.
Mark Bateman.
Here.
Chris Brantley.
Here.
Lloyd Chapman.
Here.
Rachel Dewey Thorset.
Here.
Jeff Fayville.
Here.
Jim Green.
Here.
Levy Herrera Lopez. Not here. Rick Kimball.
Here.
Adam Kohler.
Here.
Paul Kylo.
Here.
Chuck Lee.
Here.
Larry Trott.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to introduce Superintendent Perry, and she's going to start us off with our budget message.
I'm going to go there.
You go there.
Good evening, Chair Patacoli, Vice Chair McMorris Audix, members of the Budget Committee. First of all, let me thank you for your service. Today, this launches Phase 2 of our budget process. I've been in Phase 1 for a number of months, along with our Chief Operations Officer and Budget Officer, Michael Wolf. So this launches Phase 2 for us tonight. This message tonight will not only outline our the proposed budget, but we'll share with you my 8-month assessment I've completed in the district in order to develop a new strategic plan. Since the board has charged me with results, I also believe that the board has charged me to listen to both internal and external stakeholders as part of our continued and ongoing assessment of the district. As a school superintendent, this is my 10th budget message. I think this is my second or maybe third positive budget message during that time. And it just is a reminder of the roller coaster we're on with school funding. And we happen to be in a good spot on that roller coaster this year. But what that has taught me in the cutting process in my 9 years is that when you have a chance to add, you have to add in very strategic ways. And you have to think very carefully about the adds and the impact to students and the impact to the organization. Because whenever we have a chance to add, it probably isn't everything we would want to do on the list. So I understand about aligning priorities to our results and to our new strategic plan, and my hope is that you'll see that in my budget message tonight. At the March 11th meeting, I'll bring you a hopefully final draft of our strategic plan. Tonight, I'll share with you some highlights. And Christy, did they already get the PowerPoint? So I have brought you a PowerPoint so you can take notes as we go along. And when I speak, I'll speak in round numbers instead of reading every single number. You will have every single number on the sheet, and I'll have other information on several of the slides. The slides don't provide all the information, but you can have a chance to take notes as we go along. For tonight, we will hold questions. And the questions we'll work through on our work session on March 11th, and I'll kind of walk you through how we'll do that, because this will be a bit of a lengthy presentation tonight. So the good news is there's a little bit more money. The bad news is it makes the budget message a little longer. So thanks for joining me on this journey tonight. And again, just thank you for your service to this process. I know it's hard to walk into a budget message already prepared, but as you know, that's required by statute. And as the budget, as a proposer of the budget, that's my job to bring it to you tonight. So this is our public part of the process. This is our 12 years of funding history. This is a graph you have seen. The current service level on the graph is when we take our costs from the given year and roll them up without adding or subtracting anything, just our inflation and cost. So that's our current service level. And in those 5 years of budget reductions, that was the time which those of you that have been here for a while on the budget committee, you remember the years of the cuts. That's $144 million. Last year was the first chance for us to reinvest in our schools. This year we have a second set of reinvestments. And the total we'll be adding between those 2 years and reinvesting in our schools is about $37 million. So not where we were. We cut 144 and 37, but 37 feels really good at this moment in time. I'll also tell you that we're not making changes. We subtracted them. I feel like my mic isn't quite hitting me here. Because the District has changed in the last 10 years, and it really was a moment in time to pause and reflect on what we're doing and how do we move forward with student achievement in our district. The total proposed budget for you to review will be $654.1 million. 432.9 of that, or 66% of that, will be from our general fund. The other areas are areas you're familiar with, and our debt service and the other funds, but primarily we'll focus on the general fund. And tonight my presentation will be only focused on the general fund. I'm going to switch sides here. As a reminder, we're in the people business, and 85% of the proposed budget will be in salaries and benefits. We know that the most important thing we can do for every child in our district is to put an effective teacher in front of them, and it's reflected in our proposed budget, which is similar to previous years. The purchase services is at 6%, 5% is other, supplies and materials at 4%. Our purchase services include utilities, legal services, contracted work, professional technical services, and other services the district does not provide to itself and must buy from outside agencies. So let's talk a little bit of specifics here, and this is our math problem for how we figured out what we could add in this budget. So our revenue from the state school fund is at $374 million, roughly. Our exempt revenue, which this is the revenue we get from the ESD in lieu of service, it's our flow-through money, our investment earnings, our high-cost disability, and our miscellaneous revenue is categorized as our exempt revenue because it does not come through the state school fund. So it's at $22.3 million, which gives us a total projected revenue of $396.3 million. So when we add our projected ending fund balance, which is $36.5 million projected, won't be a final number until we get through the school year into next year and are audited, but our projected ending fund balance is $36.5 million. For our proposed general fund increase of $432.9 million is our proposed general fund revenue. So that's our revenue, minus our cost per current service level. So just as in the chart, the up and down chart, we have rolled up all our costs. We've taken into account inflation, cost of living, steps on the salary schedule, and what we do today, we've rolled that up, including growth. We've experienced some enrollment growth this year, so we're rolling the growth number up into our beginning cost per current service level. And so when our cost per current service level is at $406.2 million, which gives us $26.7 million to reinvest in kids and programs in our schools. Feels pretty good if you've been on the budget committee and we're in reduction years. So usually, I think that number had parentheses around it in years past. One thing to keep in mind of that $26.7 million is that 45% of that will be invested in full-day kindergarten. And I'll talk more about that as I get to that point. So in addition, we've looked at the contingency, and we're going to lower our budgeted contingency from 5% to 4%, which gives us $4.8 million to reinvest in kids and programs, our schools, and our infrastructure, which equals $31.5 million that we're going to reinvest in our school district this year. So how did we make that decision? So this begins the part of my 8-month assessment of the district and where we're headed with not only our strategic plan, but some of our budget decisions. So we have looked at our district through a series of lenses. And our lenses are our students and our demographics, our student achievement results. We've listened to our staff, which includes PACE, our teachers. I have several communication groups with licensed and classified staff and our administrators. We also are paying attention to the values of the community, which include academic options, CTE, music. And we're trying to also understand where the district is fiscally. There's a number of things that are kind of drivers in our budget this year that you haven't seen in the past. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, we took a look at where are we being really successful in our schools, and what is it about where we're being successful that is missing in other places. So let's start with who we are. This is our demographics, and we are a minority-majority district at this point at 50% minority, 50% majority. That has happened in years past, but we're hovering right around that 50-50%. We have 59% of our students living in poverty. 25% of our students hear a language other than English in their home. 19% are English language, are learning English. 15% have special education needs. That's slightly higher than the state average. And 8% are talented and gifted. So that's who we are as our students. The next thing to keep in mind is our results policy. And remember that the board has the policy governance, and they've charged me with results. This year, they've taken a look at their results policy, and this will come before the board for a second reading in May, and they've added the district's dropout rate. They've seen that as a really important indicator to them and want to be sure that we maintain at or below the state average dropout rate. We've really driven that down in the last couple of years, and they thought it was important in the results policy. So that's what the board charges me to do, which you will see as I outline the rest of the strategic plan and the budget message. So I'm going to take a minute and walk you through our achievement scores. The board has seen some of this back in October, but I think it's really important to reacquaint ourselves with where we are with student achievement as we think about limited resources and how we strategically apply those to the right places. So I'll orient you to the first couple graphs, and then they get easy. So this is the 13-14 elementary reading scores. The district is red. The dashed line is the state average. So what you will see at 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade is that we are performing below the state average in reading at our elementary schools. The next slide is our elementary school reading scores. And what you will see on our elementary schools is that at each grade level, we have a downward trend in student achievement for reading. Same graph for math. We are consistently performing below the state average in math. And our elementary math scores are trending below the state average. Now there's lots of reasons for that, and there's some things we can't control. So an example is 3rd grade and our English language learners, and those kids that haven't mastered English yet are being required to take an English-only test. So of course, in 3rd grade, when they've had access to our language for only 3 years, if they've been with us for kindergarten, they will struggle on that 3rd grade reading test. So there's some of those reasons, but there's some other investments that I want to show you on the other side of this. This is our middle school reading scores, and I want you to see what begins to happen as we progress into our middle schools. We are starting out a little bit below the state average, and by 8th grade, we're almost closing the gap between our schools and our state average. Our middle school reading scores are hovering about consistently. We'd like to definitely bring them up more, but they're not doing the downward trend. These are our math scores at the middle school, and this is definitely a chance to pause for a celebration. Our 6th graders come in just slightly below the state average in math, and by the time they leave us in 8th grade, they are performing consistently above the state average. And we are the 2nd largest district and putting a lot of kids in the system, so we're driving the average up or pulling it down. In this case, we're driving the average up for the rest of the state. And definitely a celebration and the results of some very targeted initiatives around our middle school. Next is our middle school math. And while we'd like it to be higher, again, we don't see the downward trend, and we're above the state average. Next, we see our high school scores, and what you'll see for reading and math is we're at or above the state average in reading and math. And we're really seeing that trend of how they're performing in middle schools carry into our high school numbers as well. We are still struggling a bit in science and writing. This is our high school 3-year comparison. We see an upward trend in math and reading, and that's the results of 6 through 12, a 6 through 12 effort there, and how that's really raising and gaining traction for our kids. Science and writing, just a little bit up and down. Our graduation rates, this is our 4-year graduation rates, our cohort rate, our 5-year cohort rate, and our 5-year completion rate. And remember, the 4-year cohort rate are those kids that start with us in 9th grade and finish with us in exactly 4 years. The 5-year rate are those same kids that finish in 5 years, and then the 5-year completion rate includes some of the other certificates and ways of getting high school completion. So these are high school graduates plus high school completers in that 5-year rate. And we hover right about the state average in our 4- and 5-year cohort rate. This is our 7-year overview of our dropout rate. Really important to keep this in mind because the board has said this is important to us to maintain that lowering of the dropout rate. And so in 13-14 at 3.82%, we were just a little under the state average. But if you think of where we came from in 2007, 2008, we've had a downward trend of that. Dropout rate, remember, is in grades. Any student that has left our system in grades 9 through 12. So if a student is a freshman and drops out in a school year, they're counted as a dropout. If they re-engage with us later, we don't always see that in our numbers. We don't go back and correct numbers. So it's a little bit of a misleading number, but we keep a really close eye on these kids and have strategies in place for re-engaging them at whatever time they're ready to come back to our system. So results in student achievement. Now we get to listening. We didn't know what to do about the listening slide. So I will tell you, I have spent 8 months of listening and learning and taking notes and thinking about our future. And we just thought it might be an opportunity to throw up there kind of some of the groups I've been listening to. So the majority of my listening has happened within our internal stakeholder groups, and we have a variety of those in place that I meet with on a fairly regular basis, including our associations. We have a PACE meeting, which is a joint labor management meeting that we have once a month. We have communication groups with licensed and classified staff. So all of that listening is one lens we look at in determining what do we add or what do we do with our budget priorities. And even more importantly is what happens with our strategic plan. So we have several financial drivers this year that are going to be important to note. We have less or stagnant funding from the federal level. You've probably heard this in previous budget messages, but our title funding is the same as it's been for a number of years. So same number of dollars, but more schools in need of getting title funding. So any school in our district that's 70% or above, we are required to provide title funding to. And every year we add a few more schools to that number. So next year we'll have 2 additional schools that will be title schools because they've reached that 70% free and reduced lunch level. But same amount of money spread out over more schools. We also have several expiring grants. We have a high school graduation initiative grant, which I believe you've heard about at times, but these are some really important strategies in keeping kids in high school and getting our graduation rates where they are. We have our teacher incentive fund that's going away that did a whole lot with our teacher evaluation system and work around MPD in our schools. And our minority pipeline grant, which is a really important retention or recruitment strategy for us. We're also losing that this year. So we've come to the end of those grant cycles. Back up on the lesser stagnant funding, we also have Title II, which has been used a lot in the past for professional development. Every year the Title II money gets smaller and smaller from the federal government. So until they reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is many years overdue, I believe this will be our trend in our federal funding. And then on our Perkins, it's also related to our CTE programs, and our Perkins money, it's kind of shrinking, and there's a few things in there that shouldn't be in there for the long haul. Perkins is meant to come in, reinvigorate a program, and then Perkins goes on to the next program. So there were a couple items there that are needed to be moved, or at least considered to bring into the general fund. So success in Salem-Keizer. really important is to think about what defines our success and what are the strategies we use for getting success. And this was part of my assessment of the district and figuring out how do we have some schools that do really well, even some schools with high poverty rates that do really well, and what are the factors that contribute to that success. So in our in Salem-Keizer school districts, our middle school and our high schools consistently perform on the school report card at a 4 or a 5. So that is a good rating. So 4 or 5 is awesome, 1 or 2, not so great. But our high school and middle schools are really performing well. And so I began to look at what are the strategies we use to get them there. So we have focused supervision of those schools. So we have a level director that is in charge of those schools. The level director is responsible for student achievement at those schools. And in our middle schools and high school, the school to supervisor ratio is much lower than our elementary schools. So our middle school director supervises 11 schools plus 2 charter schools. And our high school director supervises 6 comprehensive high schools plus early college in Roberts. So those are some adequate numbers of supervisor to school ratio if we're going to have results. This past 2 years, we've put bits and pieces together with elementary to help them. So we've added some supervision to our middle school director and somebody in HR to help with the supervision of elementary schools. But the budgeted amount for our elementary schools is at 22 to 1. So in our middle schools and high schools, we also have strong supports there for our schools. We have office staff that are there for the entire school day. When kids are there, office staff is there, so they're fairly adequately staffed. We have behavior specialists that help put behavior support systems in place. We have counselors, and we have even put in some special classes that have really helped us boost students. And also at these schools, we have a really strong focus on teaching and learning. And they know that their job is to be sure that we have an effective teacher in front of every student in every classroom. And they do that by having instructional coaches and effective learning teachers. And in schools that are being successful, that job-embedded professional development is really seen in those schools. They also have a guaranteed and viable curriculum. So when you ask the principals, do your teachers know what to teach and when to teach it, their answer will be yes, they do. And then there's just a commitment to improving teaching. And even though we have really strong teachers and really strong principals, we all know that we can continue to get better at what we do, and that's got to be our focus. So those were the things we looked at and said, we believe this is what's making a difference for those schools in obtaining those 4 and 5s. There's some research out of the University of Washington that would also support that the things we are doing in Salem-Keizer, especially around our middle schools and high schools, are the right work and the work that will move the mark for student achievement. So our 15-16 strategic plan, when I roll that out with the board and budget committee, it will be a new strategic plan. There will be lots that will look similar, but there'll be some really specific strategies on there for us to move the district forward. So it definitely will be alignment on the strategic plan about the state standards. Literacy is going to be key, especially in our elementary schools. Closing the achievement gap will be on there. Behavior support systems for our elementary schools. Technology to improve teaching and learning. Targeted and job-embedded professional development. High-quality staff, and space for student enrollment. When we look at our elementary schools and we look at the achievement trends and we look at the other things that are going on in those buildings, it's not for lack of effort and leadership, it's for lack of some resources. We don't have consistent behavior support systems across all of our schools. We have fewer structures in place to support teaching and learning. So in some of our elementary schools, we don't have fully staffed 2-person offices to run the full school day. So often in a school day, you'll have principals answering the phones. Okay for principals to answer the phones, but the important work we need for our principals to do is be helping teachers be better teachers and managing a building, and we need office staff there during the entire school contact day. Necessary cut during some budget cut years, but doesn't really yield instructional leadership for the elementary principal. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have supervision of our elementary schools at 2-to-1. And I will tell you, if you asked our elementary principals, they would not say we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum in our elementary schools. So those were let's look at our successes and where are we struggling, how do we figure out what are the pieces that are missing. And how did I learn all that? I spent a lot of time listening and a lot of time asking questions. Somebody today asked me, how did I archive all this information that I gained over this 8 months of listening? And I just sifted and sorted it in my head for the past 8 months as we worked as a team to figure out what was the right strategic plan and then what was the right budget additions. Because again, it won't be enough to do everything we need to do. So on to the recommended budget. The recommended budget for 15-16 maintains current programs, addresses enrollment growth, accounts for inflation, COLA, steps, and insurance for staff, lowers the budgeted contingency to 4%. It was at 5% in the past budgets. We're lowering it to 4%, and invests $3.5 million back into schools and instructional programs, including full-day kindergarten and the CTE Center. We'll still stick with maintaining an ending fund balance of 5 to 7%, and that 1% contingency amount, remember, equals about $4.3 million and is an important investment in our schools. The big picture for how we are recommending we spend the money, we'd like 80% to go to instruction, 9% to classroom space, 9% to students and staff, and 2% to central administration. So now I'll start the list. Some of them later I'll click through a little quicker. I want to start by talking about full-day kindergarten. We are incredibly excited about full-day kindergarten. Nancy, has this been the moment you've been waiting for? Okay, we're going to do full-day kindergarten. We had 200 kindergarten teachers and instructional assistants doing professional development on Monday, getting ready, and the energy in the room was infectious because they know what adding a half day of kindergarten for these kids is going to do and how it's going to raise the foundation for these kids. So 71 licensed staff, which includes classroom teachers, PE, music, and special education teachers. So all of those licensed staff are included in that number. 66 classified FTE, which includes classroom IAs and special education instructional support. Full-day kindergarten uses approximately $12 million. I know the number up there says 10, but fully it's about $12 million when you add the classroom space, because we'll have some portables that come out later in the budget. So yay for full-day K. I had to pinch myself on the way to work, on the way to the PD session, because I was like, wow, this is really going to happen. And somehow, before I got to the PD session, I just didn't quite believe it. So we're really excited about that as an investment. We know what good work it can do for our kids. All right, instructional materials is the next item on the list. We're putting $4.5 million to an elementary literacy adoption that is also really critical in investing in our elementary programs. That guaranteed viable curriculum piece, they've got to have the materials to support. Our teachers are working really, really hard to find their own materials. Will this get us all the way there? Probably not, but it's going to make a huge investment in elementary literacy. We're hoping for about 15 to 19 schools that will be our implementation schools next year if the budget's approved with an elementary literacy adoption. We're also, then I'm going to keep moving, adding staff to reduce class size at the middle schools and high schools, which is 34 licensed FTE. It doesn't really totally reduce class size at the high school because we are changing the bell schedule, which will cause a bump. So it's helping to mitigate the class size as a result of the change in the bell schedule. And then it's reducing class size at the middle school by 2. And then the next item are effective learning teachers. This is related to our consistent no increased funding in title and our more title schools on one hand, and it's also the commitment that every teacher in our district deserves the support to be an effective teacher, not just the teachers at our title schools. So because we're spreading the title dollars further, we're taking 26 licensed FTE out of our title funds so they can continue to make their title funds reach. And we're putting 26 in the general fund, combining it with the current effective learning teachers that were already there, so that every school in our district will have, at a minimum, a 0.5 effective learning teacher to coach that effective teaching practice that's so important to us. In the past, it's been title and non-title schools, and we just feel really compelled that every teacher deserves the support to be an effective teacher in front of kids. Next, we have, no surprise, the CTE Center, which will be 5 licensed, 5 classified, and 0.5 administrative FTE. We are set to open. We have about 126 kids signed up, getting near 130, and we've got more coming in. So we're excited about the CTE Center. This number is just for the FTE of that center. And then we're going to continue our previously funded high school graduation initiative grant positions. And those are our graduation coaches, sophomore connections, the literacy center, childcare for our teen parents, which we know is important to getting them to come to school, the summer transition programs, and a career specialist. All are within that HSGI funded in the past. We're moving those into the general fund. The 6 graduation coaches are really important to note because those are the employees that work so hard to re-engage our kids back in school when they become not so excited about school and are considering dropping out. So they hunt them down very nicely and do their best to bring them back to school. Next, we have an ad of behavior specialists for targeted elementary schools. We are seeing a number of elementary schools in our district without a consistent behavior plan and a behavior support system. We've done some kind of workarounds to get behavior specialists in the past when we had some reserve FTE, but it's really important that this is a consistent investment in the general fund. So we're giving about half of a behavior specialist across about 20 schools to help implement that positive behavior support system. We're also adding counselors, 5.2 licensed FTE, so that we can get a full counselor in each of our elementary schools, plus add a counselor to West and Sprague that do not currently have the same number of high school counselors as the other comprehensive high schools. Important, again, in that investment in our structure and our investment in that education of our kids, especially at the primary level. And our counselors at the elementary level, we're sharing often between buildings. And you know when kids become in crisis? When the counselor's at the other building. Next, we're adding, maintaining a behavior education, a special education classroom that we had to add out of contingency this year. We're rolling that forward into the budget for next year. And we're also adding to our behavior cadre to address student behaviors. We have a district-wide behavior cadre that really helps with some of our really high needs behavior kids and getting them set and ready to engage in school. And then we're adding intervention classes for high school students to stay on track for graduation. This is 2 licensed FTE, 1 at North, 1 at McKay, because they are experiencing about a $150,000 loss to their title funds. So we tried to make some strategic investments in the general fund. Next, we needed to move a CTE administrator from grant funds, as those Perkins funds should not sustain a position long term. That's moved into the general fund and made the classified career specialist to 12 months. We're adding elementary orchestra teachers at 1.3. Some of our schools and our schedules, we can't have orchestra at a time. Kids aren't having math or reading. So we want it to not be an either or, either orchestra or math. We want it to be orchestra and math. So it's a small investment to make sure that our kids have access to both. We need to continue the cadet teacher program previously paid for by the Minority Pipeline Grant. This is the program that helps us get kids excited about becoming educators, and this is a really important recruitment strategy for us. The way we will turn the teacher shortage around over time, I believe, is an investment in our bright and talented students in our district. And so this helps with that. Next, we're adding funds for school library collections. Implementing Avid Excel at our Title I middle school for some of our kids that need another boost in middle school through Avid. We're also adding funds for evening supervision duties at Sprague and West because they have 1 less administrator and just as many supervisions at night, and wasn't likely that we could add another administrator to those buildings in this budget. We're also adding assistant coaches for cross country at all of our high schools. Next, we're increasing the funding to the Chamber of Commerce for their Ready to Learn, Ready to Work partnership. This restores them to where they were prior to the budget cuts. What I'll tell you is where they were and where they are today. They give us a lot more programs and services for that less money, but it's time to get them back up to where they were with that contract. And it's really an important career and college pathway for us that really boosts our kids. They do lots of mock interviews and lots of programs out in our schools. So next, we're switching to direct support to staff. So we're leaving the instruction area and we're moving into the direct support to staff. Adding 6 custodians at our high schools, 1 to each comprehensive high school. We're adding classified time to our elementary school offices. The goal is that every elementary school office is staffed with 2 FTE of clerical support for a minimum of the time that kids are in the building, and 30 minutes before and a few minutes after. Really important for safety and really important for our instructional leadership. Next is kind of a big new thing, so bear with me on this one because we're really excited about it. We're adding funds for tuition reimbursement for special education Grow Your Own Teacher program. We've joined with Western in a partnership. We're taking our classified employees who have a bachelor's degree and putting them in a 15-month program. And so 1 school year from now, we will have 20 new special education teachers that will be required to teach in our district and will love to teach in our district. Currently, just for perspective, we have hired for 15-16, 26 licensed special education teachers, and we have 13 more to go. And we have attended every job fair, every university fair, done our own job fair, and are recruiting like crazy on top of being able to hire early. So we still have 13 more vacancies. So if you think about, we are needing about 40 special education teachers next year, and we might be able to hire 26. So a big investment, but huge dividends in a year. So we're investing this year. They'll go summer to summer. In 16-17, they'll be ready to teach for us as fully licensed special education teachers. We also are taking about $98,000 that was available in Title I, moving it into the general fund for professional development. We're transitioning staff from the bond fund into capital repair and maintenance, and also adding an additional $250,000 to our capital maintenance fund that we do each year for the ongoing maintenance. Really important strategy as we continue to commit to that long-term maintenance for our buildings. Those people that were in the bond fund have developed really specialized skills, really important to keep them on our staff to continue the work as we have maintenance issues that will be ongoing. We have old buildings, they will need to be maintained, so ongoing for the future. Next, we're going to fund 3 campus monitors, which were previously paid for by Title I, and add one to that. These are, again, both for McKay and North, and we believe it's essential for safety and security and student learning at those schools that we keep a secure environment. We're adding funds to replace failing phone systems that we're thankful that they answer every day. They still work at Sprague and in this building at Support Services. We're adding a textbook tracking software system at our elementary schools, adding funds for nursing and campus monitors for our summer school programs, and we're adding funds for web hosting services for the district websites. Next, we move into transportation. We are adding transportation costs for our CTE center and for our pre-K students. While we are very excited about the fact we have full day K in every single elementary building, it's caused us to need to move some of our preschool programs, and we'll have some transportation costs associated with those. We're also adding a mechanic and field coordinator in transportation, and we're going to provide transportation in this proposed budget to our high school athletes after the games. Next, we have central administration. I'm proposing that we add a level director for our elementary schools. This would allow them to be at the same little higher ratio than our middle schools and high schools. It will get them at 14 to 15 to 1 instead of 22 to 1. And remember, those are the people that are leading those schools and responsible for results in those schools. We're adding funds for a supervisor for technology, which is currently a limited term position. We have an administrator who is implementing our new school student software system. That's a project that will extend into next year that needs to become on a more permanent basis. We're adding a position to support the student teacher program and assist with hiring, and add a support staff position to the PD office. And really important again, our student teacher program, that's our pipeline of college kids into our classrooms. To date, I think we are about maybe even still 100 teachers that we have not been able to hire yet for next year, and we've already hired about 130. So we're way ahead of the game in the hiring, but we still are facing a teacher shortage. So recruitment strategies are key in our budget for next year. We need to continue to fund the positions and the web-based services for our evaluation system, which were previously paid for by the grant funds. So this was the TIF funds that helped us with our new teacher evaluation system in many places, and that staff quality piece, we'll move those into the general fund because that grant is expiring. Next, we have classroom space. So no surprise with the addition of the good news about full-day kindergarten is we're having full-day kindergarten. The tougher news about full-day kindergarten is we need to add some portables, and now we will be immediately at capacity and over capacity in many of our schools. So there's always two sides. We wouldn't trade it for full-day K. So we're going to add 5 portables. We need to add 5 portables this summer to accommodate full-day K. That gives us 10 additional classrooms. All of those portables will be located on the east side of our school district. We're also adding an additional 3 portables in this budget in anticipation that we will need additional portables in 16-17. So this is planning for the second year of the biennium, and we'll purchase and begin placing those this next spring. We also need to add funds for lease costs to relocate our pre-K program. So we couldn't do full-day K and not still do preschool because we know the value of both. And so we're relocating that into lease space. And then we're adding funds for lease costs for alternative and special education programs. And one of the things that's become really apparent this year is that McKay is overcrowded. And McKay is not just overcrowded, kind of bursting at the seams. So we're moving the Roberts Annex, which is out on the McKay campus, to a different location. And then McKay will be able to expand into that annex there. So this will give McKay a little less crowdedness. I won't say breathing room. I'm not sure it will give them breathing room yet, but it'll help for sure. So in the big picture, as a reminder, this is what we have added. 80% goes to what we count as instruction, 9% classroom space, 9% support to students and staff, and 2% central administration. So what are our next steps? Our next steps include our budget meeting on May 11th. We will have our public hearing set for, at a minimum, May 18th and 19th. And the school board is set to take action on the budget on June 9th. So just some final thoughts. After a thorough assessment of the district, this is my recommended budget. The 2-year reinvestment in our schools is about $37 million over the course of the 2 years. There are still things missing from this proposed budget, and it's all about prioritizing and figuring out strategically what you can do with the money you have. We could argue that the $12 million investment in kindergarten could be used for class size reduction or a number of other things instead, but the only way we get money from the state for kindergarten is if we have full-day kindergarten. And we believe the money from the state will be about $7.7 million, really rough number, and we'll need to invest $12 million. But in order to get the money, we have to invest in full-day K, but it's absolutely the right investment. So the proposed budget I presented invests in our infrastructure and support to our classrooms. It's focused on student achievement, plans for the future, and provides a system for sustainable ongoing instructional improvement for our teachers. and it will provide full-day kindergarten and additional career and technical opportunities for our student. There's some great opportunities in this budget, and there's lots to be excited about. And I just want to remind you that the research is really clear that to improve student outcomes, we must be insistent on an effective teacher in front of every classroom. And second to that is about the leadership in our buildings, because we know that the strongest of leaders make sure they are building teachers so that we are sure we have an effective leader or effective teacher in front of every classroom. So principals have to be high-functioning professional leaders, and we must be insistent on that high quality in every classroom. So with that, I'll take a breath, and we're going to take about a 10-minute recess, and Christy has some additional materials, and you'll get your budget book that you've been waiting for. And then we'll reconvene at, what's it look, about 5 to 7? Does that work, Betty? If we reconvene at about 5 to 7?
Good.
All right, sounds great. Thank you.
If you could all please take your seats. And Superintendent Perry is going to explain some roles and responsibilities for us.
All right, so you have heard the budget message now, and we are going to begin that going through the document just in a little bit tonight. What we're hoping to have happen is we can orient you to the document tonight, and then you can begin thinking about what your questions are, because there were a lot of things I presented, and it's a really big document. And so our hope is that you can begin getting questions to Christy Brooks-Lathers, the Christy with a K. She'll send an email out tomorrow that is sure that you have all the documents you need, and remind you that she's the one to send questions to, because then she'll get them out to us, and we'll come back on the 11th then with a full presentation or answers to the questions, or dig deeper into certain areas of the budget document if that's what's needed. As part of your materials, you do have the Budget Committee job description that the board adopted, and the letter from our legal counsel about the roles of the Budget Committee. I think most of you, even new members, have seen these because we got these out ahead of time. And then to make it easier for what were all the things that were up on a slide, so you don't need to look at 50 pages, we have the ads on one page with the corresponding FTE and dollars. Oh, they're in the front page of your notebook is where they are, if you hadn't found yours yet. So we tried to do that to make this easier for you. It's also something that we'll be able to put up on our public website tonight for people to see, rather than going through all of the PowerPoint presentation. So that's our process from here on out. It's just a lot of information to take in, so we think it's a moment to pause and think about what your questions are going to be, and then come back around to a work session. But with that, Mike Wolf is going to begin walking you through some highlights of the document.
Great, thank you. So it's fairly large, like it is every year, but it's well put together. And before I get into it, I just want to acknowledge Susan Dodd and the budget team, who did, really the work started in October, and it's taken several months to get to this point, so just wanted to acknowledge that group. And I would focus your attention really on, I'd start with tab 2. It's the introductory section, and it really gives you a description of the components of the budget, so it's really good background. It also focuses on prior years, financial information, and district background. What's some of the charts and the matrices that we have in here are really good roll-up summaries, and tab 4 begins the financial summaries, and that's where you can see the fund-by-fund breakdown of function and object for each of the 7 funds. So that's sort of the entire budget right there in tab 4. And then, of course, tab 5 begins the general fund, and that's where you'll see the sources and uses of the funds. And I would call out 2 pages to focus your attention on. And each section, or the pagination's a little off in the proposed, but in the adopted budget, there are actually page numbers without Roman numerals associated with them. But page Roman numeral 4-12 is a summary of requirements, and that's a really good roll-up page. And then Roman numeral 4-65 begins a series of summaries, crosswalks, and comparisons of the general fund. And those are usually good areas that can answer a lot of questions if you have them around what certain funds are, particularly in the general fund, how they compare. And then tabs 6 through 11 are the remaining 6 funds. And then tab 12 is our informational section, and that's where you can find all the personnel information and all the statistical information on the district. So it's there's a lot of information in here, and I would encourage you to take a look at it, ask whatever questions you need to ask to be clear about what the budget is actually describing, and we'll do our best to answer them. That's all I have.
The Roman numerals are so that we're confused.
We're trying
okay.
something new this year.
Thank you.
One of the things I think I mentioned when we did our budget committee orientation, the things that I do when I'm trying to take quick looks to see where we've added and what it means out to classrooms is I tend to look less at the numbers and look more at the FTE because I know what that means out to classrooms. So that's why I like to look at the pages around our FTE because it tells us what's going on in our schools. And then also the one that shows here are the positions we added because of growth and the function and object code, and here are the positions we're adding as a result of add packages is another good one that I think really helps explain the message I gave when you dig into the details. So when I was looking at Salem-Keizer, before I applied here, those are the things I quickly looked at because it really helped guide me with what had happened in the budget seasons, because you can look back over prior years and you know what happened out in classrooms as a result. So do you have questions about what the orientation of the budget document?
Can you tell us where those things are you just mentioned?
Yeah, and I will do it slowly. So the summary of FTE starts on section Roman numeral 4-70. Tab, it's going to be tab 5. Sorry.
4.
Yeah, not tab 4.
Thank you.
Yes, tab 5, page 4-70 is where that starts.
Okay.
And as you see, this is even where I've already highlighted in mine because that's the immediate sections I go to. And then when you get to the same section, section 5, 4-72, this is where you begin to see how we've distributed the FTE and why the numbers that are increasing in FTE aren't the same as what the add packages were that I showed on the slides. So at the top of 4-72, you see realignment of FTE within special education. So these are some budget adjustment things. And you go all the way down and you can see where we've added for growth. So for a good example is the counseling example. I put on the slide 5, I think it was 5.2 addition of counselors. There's really a 7.2 addition in the budget because 2 are for growth. So we've rolled up some things because of enrollment growth that didn't appear as an add package because that's how we do that roll-up number. So this FTE breakdown really tells you the story of what happened within that budget document as we were working and preparing and rolling it forward. So that's my kind of best guide. The next section is still in tab 5. I won't leave tab 5. Is section, is the crosswalk pages, which is 4-83. And this one really helps me see how the each thing is allocated and what that looks like. And it's just a really good crosswalk page to help you understand codes and function codes and all of that. So that's where I like to spend my time. But then there's others of you that would like to look at that and go back to the numbers part of it. But the two together are what really tell the story because it's hard to break down the numbers to know what that does out in our classrooms and for programs. So that's my version of how to best look at the document. So do you have questions about kind of how the document is oriented? I know many of you have the experience, so this is not anything a lot different than previously.
Yes, Jim.
So not so much on how it's oriented, but just on why is it Salem-Keizer has the ability to add when we've heard from so many districts across the state that they're not. And I just want to make sure that for those that may be reporting this, they understand why Salem-Keizer is adding when they're hearing from a number of districts across the state that they're having to reduce under this state school fund appropriation. I know there's a couple of quick, easy answers. You and I have talked about this, so.
So the answers are, we have a lot more kids, so a lot more weights in the system. We also have increasing enrollment. Increasing enrollment is always on our side when we are looking at funding, so when we have economy and scale. When I was in a district with declining enrollment, our budget reductions went far deeper because of the declining enrollment. We have additional weights in the system for our ELL students, which we have the most ELL students in the state. So again, it's that economy of scale. We are recommending that we dip into the contingency account to move that from 5% to 4% and to get our ending fund balance back in adjustment at 5 to 7%. So all of those factors combined make Salem-Keizer have a really positive message, while many districts around us will be cutting. And I was really intentional in my additions to be sure that we were investing in a way that would carry us for the biennium. And I think that's really important. The investment today should last us for 2 years before we know what the change will be. And of course, none of us can do all the magic to know what's going to happen. But really important is that we believe, knowing, given the factors that we have today, that this budget will carry us forward for the next 2 years.
Nancy?
I don't know if you want questions about the message, or you want us to get them to Christy and she could answer them?
I think that would be great because it allows us to collect and decide if we're going to do a full presentation, and unless you had like a really quick clarifying question.
So, yeah, I'll turn it into one. So you talked about the literacy adoption for the elementary school, and then you said that there would be 19, I think you said, schools that would be piloting that. Does that dollar amount get you literacy materials for all the grade schools, so that, or is that just providing it for half the grade schools?
We think it's going to get us close, but we have to go through the adoption process to know for sure. But I'll come back next time with a little more information around that, because we do have a spending plan. And our key with the elementary literacy adoption is that we don't put materials in teachers' hands before a school and the teachers are ready for it, because there's nothing worse than purchasing materials and having them be on the shelf. So that's why we're starting with 18 to 19 implementation schools, because they're really ready for it. And we could add a few to that number based on the budget. But I'll bring back for next time as one of the items to bring back with this kind of spending, what that looks like.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Thank you, Superintendent Perry. Okay, so next up we will meet again Monday, May 11th here at 6 p.m. Again, please get questions, comments, thoughts, what you want answers on to Christy as soon as possible, so that they have some time to work out the answers to that for us to discuss. After that, we will meet the week of May 18th through the 21st. Typically what happens is the 18th and 19th, Monday and Tuesday, we will meet. We will take public testimony. We will hear any other comments. And then the following 2 days are whether or not we have adopted a budget, whether we will meet again. But that whole week right now is on the schedule.
Can I just make one clarifier too? When you submit the questions to us, if there is questions that are submitted that seem like they are a ton of staff time and might be a one-person question, we'll take that to Nancy and Betty to help us decide, is this worth the time for the whole group? And so that's the majority of them. We'll do everything we can to just quickly answer. But if we have a couple of those that we aren't sure about, we'll let Betty and Nancy help us sort those for us.
Okay, then on June 9th, the school board regular business meeting. We'll take public testimony and go from there. And remember, we are here to overall look at this budget. We're not here to change $1,000 from one line to another, so keep that in mind when you send in your questions and comments so that we can have something of value to this. Any other thoughts, comments, Jim?
And all future meetings of the Budget Committee will be here, correct?
That is correct. Anyone else? Okay, thank you all for your time, and we are adjourned.